look into the book of Numbers at a passage that confused me for a number of years, but I think I've got a grip on what God's trying to say here. Numbers chapter 20. Remember last Sunday I mentioned that while we're in Numbers 20, I said this is one message, there's another one next week. So here's that same passage, and let's see if you catch right away what I missed for a number of years. We're going to look at Numbers 20, verses 1 through 13. Now, we're going to, for the sake of the story today, just to maybe include the background, I'm going to read a portion of what we read last week, the first couple of verses. Chapter 20 of Numbers, verse number 1. Then the sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Now Miriam died there and was buried there. There was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. That's what we saw last week. Then the people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our beasts to be here, or to die here? Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us into this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the doorway of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Now we know they fell on their faces. They were praying again, like we'd seen times before. Verse 7, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, there we go. He always prayed to God when there was trouble, and God speaks. And just like with us today, I always know when there's trouble, go to God, and eventually He'll speak. He may put you off a little bit, but eventually you'll hear from Him. Here's what He said, verse 8, take the rod, or the staff that he had, you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes that it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock. And he said to them, listen now, you rebels. He done got in the flesh, see. Listen now, you bunch of heathens, you rednecks, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, I thought, my goodness, they messed up. What did they do? We'll look at that in a minute, but look what happens next. God says, therefore, you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. There we go. They didn't treat God as holy. The King James says hallowed, as hallowed. This word holy comes from the Hebrew word kedas. It means to treat as divine, to treat as separate, to hallow, sanctified, consecrated, to set apart. So God wants to be treated differently. So holy treatment, that's the name of this lesson this morning that I chose to title it Holy Treatment. In other words, treat God as holy. That's what the message is. Treat God as holy. Well, first of all, when we get a chance to treat God as holy, He gives us a holy treatment test. And we see the test from last week. It's right here in the first part of the chapter. He leads these people to another place of need. And it's the same thing that's happened already 3 times before. They need some good water to drink. We saw that happen in the previous stories. I don't know that I brought out every one of them. Remember, there was one place they had bad water, and Moses cut a stick and threw it in, and the water was healed. There was another place where Moses there was another time where God said, here's a rock, strike it, the water is going to come forth. So the water came forth abundantly, problem solved. But this was the fourth time they had a water problem this week. I guess it was last Friday, a few days ago, I can't remember. I was at one of the schools, the old Riverside school, and one of the workers there, her battery was dead, and she had a problem. Well, what do you do when you got a dead battery? You get somebody to jump you off, right? So our maintenance foreman and myself, we were there. We were talking about some things going on that campus that we were trying to follow up on. And as we were about to leave, the secretary comes running out and calls the lady's name that has a problem and said she needs some help. And so anyway, she got there. And you got jumper cables? Yeah, I've got jumper cables. So we took them out of the truck, and we were parked. The maintenance truck was sitting right beside her, and I was on the other side and one of the vehicles. And so popped the hood on both vehicles and used the truck battery, put the battery cables on, cranked it right up. Now, I know from the first time I saw jumper cables used, if I'm somewhere and I'm at Walmart or somewhere, and so let's say I'm at Walmart. Everybody knows where Walmart is. And I've got a dead battery. Well, I keep jumper cables with me most of the time. We've got jumper cables, I think, in both of our vehicles. And so if that time ever comes that your alternator goes out, you don't know about it, your battery's dead, and you get back in, you turn that key and nothing happens, no lights, must be a dead battery, right? But you don't go crazy if you got jumper cables. You might panic a little bit if you don't have any jumper cables. But hey, that's all right. I got a problem, but I know what I'm going to do. And so you get somebody. You may have to be bold and call somebody on the phone, or if you see somebody in the parking lot that's got a truck, or you just ask them to jump you off. Anybody ever had to do that before? Raise your hand. We know how it worked. Now, how did we learn that? From a previous experience. You would think these people, this being the fourth time, they still had a bad response. See, they still were failing the test that God was giving them. They had prior water problems, and they should have remembered the first time they had a problem, Moses prayed, God performed a miracle. The second time, they should have remembered the first time and not panicked, but they didn't. They still panicked, and they said things they shouldn't. They got all out of whack and in the flesh. I guess they were in the flesh, so they didn't have to try. They were already in the flesh. But they didn't say, Moses, pray, man. We need to call on God. They didn't learn the lesson. The third time, they still didn't. And the fourth time, when the problem came along, I'm not worried about it. All we got to do is pray. God to help us. They didn't learn it. They didn't treat God as holy. They had unbelief. Now, that's going to be made clearer to us a little further here as we look into another point or two. But the point is on this first part is there are holy treatment tests that come along for you and I. We have opportunities when God leads us into a need of whether we're going to treat God holy or not. Are we going to treat him as who he really is, as God, or are we just going to panic and just be all fearful and all the things that we choose to be instead of what we should be? They failed to believe God, and they, as a result, were not treating him as holy. Now let's look at the next thing here, and that is another instance here. I want to look at Aaron and Moses and how they missed treating God as holy as well. We just read it, verses 7 through 12. Remember, when they had the problem, they did just as they've done before, not only with water problems, but every time there was a problem, we see them falling on their faces. And always God has shown up. Always he's told them what to do, just like he will with you and I. We fall on our face with God. Listen, that's not the norm. The people in the world, that we see out beyond these church walls, that's not the norm for them. They're going to be worriers. They're going to be fearful. They're going to be panicking, not knowing what to do. But here, they just went by what they'd been doing, what they knew to do. Call on God, God helps. Well, this time, look what happened. God spoke to Moses, and they go, and they get to this rock. Moses struck the rock twice with his rod. Water came forth abundantly, and you thought, man, God done it again. And he did. He proved himself as holy. Look what it says there in verse number 13. These were the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel contended with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. Now, God's shown me a better definition from my understanding is not necessarily consecrated. That's the right definition. Set apart, that's the right definition. But when I read this, he proved himself God among them. Now I can grasp that. I can get my hands around that. He proved he was who he is. He proved he was God. He wants to be treated like he's God. Yes, divine is correct. Yes, consecrated is correct. But so is God. And from my understanding, in my little old tiny brain, I can relate to that a little better. Now, where did they mess up at? I didn't catch it. And for years I stumbled over that, but let me see if I can show you what God showed me. What did God tell Moses to do in verse 8? It says, verse 7, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, now look what he says. Take the rod, all right, there's the first commandment. Take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation. There's 2. Number 3, speak to the rock. You see the difference? What did Moses do? He did step 1, step 2, but he struck the rock. And because my memory was thinking, well, God told him to strike the rock. Not in this story. In a previous story, Exodus chapter 17, at Mount Horeb, and the Lord, when they had the water problem, the Lord spoke to Moses, and he said, do these things, and then you take the rod, and you strike the rock, and I'm going to stand on the rock of Horeb, but you strike the rock of Horeb, and water will come out. That was for a previous time. See, Moses, either he didn't pay attention to detail, or, his mind just wasn't in it, or he was fleshly. I don't know what the reason was, but the bottom line is he didn't do exactly as God told him to do. And when God tells us to do something, we don't need to do less, and we don't need to do more. We need to do exactly as God says for us to do. And Moses and Aaron did not do this. They added words to the people that God didn't tell them to say that to the people, you bunch of rebels. Some people need telling off once in a while, right? Like a friend I had, well, we think they do. I had a friend that was in college. Y'all have heard me talk about probably my best friend in college, David Simmons, a real godly guy that helped pull me up to another level. He believed God, he feared God, he did not fear people. I told you about the time, I think, when the first time I'd met him, and we got to be friends, and I was pretending I was all spiritual, and I really hadn't arrived to the level I was pretending to be at. And so he and I would go eat lunch together, and we were talking about people we needed to pray for. And he was concerned about some things, and we were riding down Wynn Street, where Wynn Street Park is in Marietta, that old park. And he said, Brother Ellis, there's a park. He said, there's a bench. Let's go over there and pray. So I had time to put up or shut up. I pulled in the parking lot, thinking we can just pray here in the car, just get the can down there. He got out, started heading down. Thinking, well, I can't be outdone. I was scared to death. I was afraid some of my people that knew me would be coming by and see me out there, see? But it didn't bother him. But he went down there and he knelt down and started praying. So I just knelt down beside him. That helped me break a fear barrier in life. But God is God. He needs to be treated as holy. You don't worry about what other people think. He's God. You do it because he's God. And here, they didn't carry out what God said to do fully, completely, as he said. Yes, they carried the rod. Yes, they assembled the people together. But he struck the rock. How many times did he strike this rock? 2. I looked at that and I thought, The first time when he struck the rock, when God told him to do it, God said, strike the rock. Didn't say strike it twice. I think when he struck that rock the first time, that water came gushing forth. But when he struck it this time, it was like turning the key. Wasn't nothing happening. I better do this again. So he hit it again. And God didn't want Moses to make a fool out of him or a fool out of himself. And so God said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to supply this water. Me and Moses are going to have a talk just a little bit. See? So that's what happened, I think. That's the way I interpret this. And what happened was, because he didn't follow God's words fully, he missed out on a blessing, a big, huge blessing. What was it? He didn't get to enter the promised land. God said, because you failed to treat me as holy, guess what, Moses? You're going to die right here in this wilderness like everybody else. You're not going to get to go to the promised land. Him and Aaron. So, in essence, what they were also doing, they shortened their own lifespan. Think about it. I don't know how old they would have lived, but we know that it was months later. This was possibly in the 40th year. But we know that when Joshua led them across the Jordan and into the promised land, they could have, if he'd have been with that crew, they would have had at least 6 more months or so. So he cut his life short. He missed out on a blessing of God of being able to see the promised land. And then you can think, take that back. He got to see it. He didn't get to lead them into it. God took him up on a hill and said, there it is. You can look at it, but now you're not going there. You're not going there. So the lesson for us is treat God as holy. God proved he was God. Treat God as God. He proved himself as God, as holy. And let's look at an example here, a good application of what it means a little deeper into the lesson, by using the book of Malachi, chapter 1. Everybody turn there? You there yet? I'll give you a hint. It's the last book in the Old Testament, right before Matthew, the book of Malachi. And I'm going to read about 3 verses here, verses 6 through 8. Basically what's going on here, God is a little frustrated with this bunch of people of Israel. And to the point that they're not treating him as holy. They're not treating him as God. Look what he says in verse 6. A son honors his father, and a servant his master. Then if I'm a father, where is my honor? And if I'm a master, where is my respect? Says the Lord of hosts to you, O priest who despise my name. But you say, how have we despised thy name? And God said, okay, glad you asked. Now I'm fixing to tell you what I'm talking about. He said, when you are presenting defiled food upon the altar, that's how, you're despising my name. That's how you're not basically treating God as holy. But you say, how have we defiled you? And that you say the table of the Lord is despised. But verse 8, he says, but when you present the blind for a sacrifice. In other words, remember the Old Testament law was you present the best to God. You present an unblemished lamb or unblemished goat or whatever it was for that particular offering. It's without blemish, without spot. It's a good sacrifice. It's the best of the flock. He said, but if you're going to bring me an old sick one, an old blind one, and I'm God, where is my respect? Where is my honor? He said, would you offer that to your governor? Would he be pleased with you? Or would he receive you kindly, says the Lord? Verse 9, but now will you not entreat God's favor, that he may be gracious to us? With such an offering, look, you're going to bring me some sick animal for an offering when I want the best of the flock, and you're going to expect me to answer your prayer and bless you? See, treat God as holy. Treat God as holy. I'm going to close with a few examples. I remember when I was a little boy in this church, my Granny Ella sat back over there about where Courtney is, on that side. And I remember that when she sat over on that side. Okay? I remember one time she was giving a testimony, and it was on might have been a Wednesday night prayer meeting time. But she was sharing back the story, which had just happened when we had this big rain, a big flood came, and that hill up, the Baxley Hill up top, the Stanley Hill, that road coming down that hill was muddy, muddy, muddy. And she said, I started just to stay home because I was scared that, that thing's so muddy, I may slide in a ditch. She said, but I got thinking about it. If it was time to go to work and I had to go up that road, I'd go. She said, so God's more important than my work. So I went on and I came on to church. See, she was treating God as holy. I remember back again when I was a little boy, Preacher Hall, Miss Ann was here, and it was before anything got built over there for them to live in. They would come from Sop Choppy as school teachers, and they would stay here for Sunday morning church. And then the different families would take turns inviting them to their homes to have lunch for them and let them hang out till Sunday night church training and worship time came. Then they would drive back home because they had nowhere to stay. And so I remember I used to love for them to come to our house on Sunday. Mama would really fix a big meal. Why? Because the preacher was coming. And sometimes I believe she had a special tablecloth she would take out and put on the table. You didn't see that tablecloth except for special occasions. And so when the preacher was coming, well, it was a joyful time. No, we always enjoyed his company. But the point is, she would do something special knowing the preacher was coming. Well, we do things special whenever a certain person comes, or we're going to be in a different person's presence. But when we're going to be in God's presence doing things for Him, it needs to be different. We need to make sure we treat Him as holy. If I'm preparing a message and I know a governor or somebody showing up, should I do any better for them than I normally do try to do for God? I try to do, now my messages aren't the greatest, but I try to do my best as if the Lord Jesus is sitting right here, all right? Now, again, it may not always show, but that's my goal, so I try to start working at the beginning of the week, and so I give it my best. I remember when I was dating my wife before we got married. She wasn't my wife then, but during college days, I attended church with her. Was going to attend church. This was on, I think, a Saturday. And we were going to attend her church, Highland Park Baptist Church, on a Sunday morning, the next morning. So we were going out to eat somewhere. Ran into her Sunday school teacher. The Sunday school teacher, I got introduced to her. And I guess somewhere in the conversation, or maybe from prior conversation with her and Kathy, she knew I was headed in preparation for the ministry. She made this comment that stood out to me, and I still remember it today. She said, "Oh, you coming to my Sunday school class this morning? Well, I better go home and study my lesson a little more." Now, wait a minute. You give your best for God. He's going to be there. You don't just study, and as a teacher and do your best because somebody different's coming that may know a little bit, okay? And when I was, I've been to churches before where somebody come up, lead the singing. Let's see. Let me see if I can find one here. You got number 39 over in your book. And they fumble around and find it. They get started and sing. Anybody else? Somebody else got one y'all want to sing? And no plans. And it's kind of haphazard. Now, we get here, we practice before the service. It may not sound like it sometimes, to try to do our best for the Lord. But God deserves our best. I make enough mistakes playing for worship, okay? There's so much changing. We do music every Sunday. I think about, man, it'd be great to be one of those musicians on the road. They do the same set of songs over and over and over. We do a different set every Sunday. So it's hard to be, perfect. But we get here ahead of time, an hour before, and try to practice because God deserves better than just showing up and hit and miss. Okay? We want to treat God as holy. Are there things that we still may need to sharpen our skills, maybe practice a little more? Probably so. But we need to have as our goal, all that we do it as unto the Lord. And He says, you need to treat me as holy. He was upset with Moses and Aaron. They didn't treat him as holy, and they robbed himself of blessings. A big blessing. They shorten their lifespan. I'm not saying God's going to shorten your lifespan. I'm not saying that. But the point is, God will bless you. I will say that. The more you treat God as holy, the more He'll bless you. Let's stand together and pray.